This is a question I get a lot. How do you use sidechain compression? What is sidechain compression? How can you make sidechain sound so good? It seems to be one of those things that some producers really struggle with. And the concept is pretty simple, right? And still, I get this a lot because sometimes it's just difficult to make it work with the track that we have. So in this video, I'm gonna show you 5 different ways you can apply sidechain compression to your tracks. And depending on the situations, one is just gonna work better than the other ones. So let's dive into this. All right, guys, my name is badhabit, and for this video, I wanna start from the classic sidechain compression, the method that everybody knows already. And for this, I want to show you the song that I did for my masterclass on studio.com as an example, because that's the method that I used in this track. And by the way, the class is out now, so make sure to check the link in the description if you're interested. Okay, so classic sidechain. As you can see, for this, I used a very simple compressor. This is the Ableton stock compressor. You can use any compressor, really. Any stock compressor coming from your DAW is going to work just fine for this. But I'm going to redo it from scratch so you can see my thought process. So the concept is pretty simple, and for those of you who don't know, sidechain compression is a widely used technique nowadays in music production. We use it for multiple reasons, but the main one is to make sure that kick and bass are not in the way of each other. Because think about it, the kick is gonna have a lot of low end and the bass is gonna have a lot of low end, so they're gonna fight to come out in your track. And if you don't take care of it, you're gonna end up having a bad sounding kick and a bad sounding bass, just a huge mess. We're gonna put the compressor on the bass track, this pink one, and we're gonna set it in a way that anytime the kick is playing, the bass is gonna be tamed in volume to make room for the kick. In this compressor, you can activate the sidechain mode by clicking this little arrow right here and then clicking sidechain. That's gonna allow you to choose an input, to choose a source. And like we said, we want the kick to be our source. So I'm gonna click here and I'm gonna see the list of all of my tracks. So we're gonna have to find the kick in this list. And in this case, it's pretty easy. It's right here, kick. And now we can start playing with these parameters to make sure that it sounds like we want to. So quick overview, the ratio, you can think of it like the aggressiveness of your compression. The attack is pretty intuitive, how long before the compressor starts to tame the sound. And the release time is how long do you want the compressor to keep compressing, to keep reducing the gain, to keep taming the volume of the bass before it goes back to 0 dBs, so before it goes back to its original volume. And finally, the threshold, it's a very important parameter because this tells the compressor, hey, whenever you detect that the signal that we have selected as a source, so the kick in this case, goes above this threshold that we have set, so in this case, this would be 19.6 dBs, anytime that happens, you compress. And we're gonna see this in action in a second. So a combination of settings for all of these parameters is what's gonna give you a great sounding sidechain. So let's hear what's actually happening. Anytime the kick is playing, the bass is tamed. So look at this again. Here we have a bass note and here we have a kick. So I suppose that this note is going to be attenuated in volume. Let's see. Look at the gain reduction. It's actually happening. So the sidechain is working, and now it's about finding a balance between these parameters. So usually I start from like a medium ratio. Usually I go for 3, 3.5, something like that. The attack, I like to keep it pretty short, and so that's pretty good for now. I can start playing with the release and the threshold. These are the 2 parameters that I start playing with the most in the beginning. I want the sidechain to be pretty short in this case. So the release is going to be short. And the little number that you see here, minus 11, that's the gain reduction. So that means that the bass is getting attenuated around 11 dBs anytime the kick is playing. So as I go higher with the release, you're going to start noticing it way more. Even more if I increase the threshold. So that's the general concept, but there's a few things that I would have done differently because, let's be honest, this is not sounding really good, right? So I have a few tricks that I use every single day that are going to allow you to have more flexibility and achieve a way better result at the end. First of all, common practice is instead of choosing the kick as the source, like we just did here, choosing instead a very short trigger. Stay with me because you're going to find out why this is so convenient. All right, little break. I've got an announcement. You know how much I care about building a strong community for producers, songwriters, just music people in general. And I'm super excited to launch my Discord server. I've been working on it for a while and you know, I'm a perfectionist, but at some point I just gotta say it. So come join, guys. It's free. There's gonna be a ton of value. You can meet new people to collaborate with, just chat, share your music. I'll share some samples with you guys and much more. And in the future, I'm also also gonna give benefits to those subscribed to my YouTube channel. So come, say hi. We are a new community for now, but I believe that we can become the biggest and the strongest producer community online. So link in the description, it's gonna be fun. And now back to sidechain compression. So as my trigger, I like to use a very short sample. There's one that I've been using for the past 10 years, always the same for every single track. And it's this one right here. Super short, clicky sound. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new track. I'm gonna drag this in. And as you can see in this session, I did it already. There's a track called Sidechain and it's exactly this same sample, but we're gonna redo it from scratch so you actually know what's happening here. Call this track trigger. We wanna put this little sample, this little trigger sample anywhere the kick is playing. So I'm gonna start putting it here and another one here and so on. I'm gonna mute this track. I don't wanna hear this in my song. That's just the trigger. And at this point, we have to go back to our compressor and change the source. Instead of kick, we're gonna select trigger. This is gonna do exactly the same thing as having the kick as a source, but with a few advantages. As you can see, the sidechain is still working, but the gain reduction now looks so different. And let's see why. Number one, look at the difference between these two waveforms. The kick is way longer than the trigger. And because of this tail, the compressor is gonna keep detecting some signal up until right here, and this is going to result in the compressor being slower, going back to 0, because it's going to detect the signal for a longer period of time. By using this click instead that only lasts a few milliseconds, you have a better control over the release times. Once the compressor gets past this signal, then it's up to you if you want to have a longer release or not. Number two, listen carefully to this beat. If you notice, the kick is not 4 on the floor. It's on the 1 and the 3. On 2 and 4, it's only the snare. This is the snare. So technically, if you use the kick as your source, your bass is not going to be attenuated every 4th. It's going to be sidechain on the 1 and sidechain on the 3. But that's not what I want, because yes, the kick is not playing on 2 and 4, so it's not in the way of the bass there, but the feeling of the song is definitely 4 on the floor. So I want the bass to have that nice pumping effect happening every 4th, and that's the way you do it. So I'm also going to put the trigger here on the 2 and the 4 where the snare is playing. At this point, I'm just trying to find a good balance between these parameters. You're gonna have to use your ears, and depending if you want a very noticeable pumping effect or not, you're gonna have to play with these parameters and achieve that. Of course, if you want to have a longer sidechain, more noticeable, you're gonna have to increase your release and increase the threshold. But that's not what I want for this song. I want something very transparent and natural, and I think these parameters are giving me that. I like this result. So let me give you a little tip. A good rule of thumb for kick and bass especially is making sure that your release time is not too long. What I mean is you gotta check the gain reduction and make sure that the signal being reduced, so the bass in this case, can go back to 0 dBs before getting tamed again by the next kick that's coming right after. So let me show you. See, the gain reduction can go back to 0 in time before starting again. But if the release starts getting too long, see, the gain reduction cannot go back to 0. So this means that your bass is not going back to its original volume ever, and you don't want that, because that's not going to give you that nice pumping effect. Okay, so just make sure that the release time allows your gain reduction to go back to 0 and your bass to come out in the track and go back to its original volume. Amazing. So this sounds good. Let's move on to method number 2. Oh, this one is going to be interesting, and it's probably my favorite. It's based on the same concept of having a trigger whenever the kick is playing, but this time, instead of using a very simple compressor like the Ableton stock one, we're going to use a multi-band compressor. Depending on how advanced you are in your music production journey, you might be familiar with multi-band compressors or not, but don't worry, because I'll show you everything you need to know. So for this one, I'm using FabFilter Pro MB, which is an amazing multi-band compressor by FabFilter, and I like to use this technique whenever I have a very busy bass line and I still want all the notes to be very noticeable and hearable. So it's called multi-band because we can create bands. So I'm just gonna click here, and as you can see, now we have basically the same controls that we have in a normal compressor. So we still have attack, release, threshold. I created this band right here only affecting the low frequencies. This is 100 hertz, so this is only affecting the low end, and I did this because, like I said, I want all the notes to be very noticeable still. So we're gonna start compressing and taming only the low end. Whatever comes next, we're not gonna touch it, and that's not gonna be attenuated at all. This is so good, like with real sounding bass. Like in this case, this is a real bass that I recorded, and it works incredibly well if you want to retain all of those high frequencies coming from the sound of the pick. So to activate the sidechain for this one, I'm gonna have to click expert, select external, and here as external input, I'm gonna just select my trigger once again. So now the sidechain is active and I can start playing with these parameters. And by increasing this range, the reduction is gonna become more and more noticeable. Anytime this is playing, the low end is going to be reduced by around 18 dBs or so. Again, it's about finding a good balance between all of these parameters. I still want the attack to be pretty short and the release to be pretty short, maybe a little bit longer than that. But again, we want the signal to go back to 0 in time. If I have the release too long, look at this. This is not going to be enough for the bass to go back to 0 dBs. So as you can hear, all of the high frequencies are still there. That's exactly what I wanted, but the bass is not in the way of the kick. One more thing. Let's say that you also want to attenuate a little bit the high frequencies. You can absolutely do that. You can just create a new band, a unique band for all of the rest of the frequencies. Maybe for these, I'm going to have just a slight reduction, something not as noticeable. Ratio at 2 instead of 4. So these are like two separate compressors. See, this one and this one. So each band has its own controls. And that's what's so cool and powerful about multiband compressors. This is going to give you great flexibility. So make sure to give this a try. All right, we got to method number 3. This is probably the easiest one available to us, but it's not going to work every single time. So I have this little idea that I started today. And I think this can be a good example to show you how we can achieve sidechain compression using those plugins like LFO Tool or Shaperbox. There are so many ways I use LFO Tool to obtain different results, but most people use it for sidechain. And the same goes for Shaperbox, which is this one right here. So first of all, let me play you this little idea. Such a cool vibe. Woo! This little sample that I tweaked with all of these amazing plugins by Baby Audio. I'm gonna show them to you in another video. The chords coming from the Jupiter. So what I'm thinking now is that I feel the need to have such a pumping effect with a very present sidechain. I don't have a kick, I don't have a bass, I know, but that's exactly why I chose this little idea, because I want to show you a different approach, a different way you can use sidechain. I'm going to put LFO Tool on the group. So as you can see, when you open it, it has already a curve that looks like a sidechain, and we can adjust that. Grab the points, add new points. You have to explore it a little bit to understand the full potential of plugins like LFO Tool. And if you haven't watched it yet, just make sure that you watch my video about drums. I don't know if it's here or here, I have no idea. Make sure to check that out, because in that video I'm showing you how to use LFO Tool to achieve some very cool things on drums. That's what I was thinking. What you see here, this red thing, is the waveform, is the signal of our synth going through LFO Tool. I want the sidechain to be really, really noticeable. So in the beginning, I want the signal to be almost completely attenuated, and that's why I'm doing this. And going back to like full volume when it gets to the middle. And remember, what we see here is a quarter of a note, because that's the rate. Love it. And I can play with this curve, make it even more noticeable, but I don't know if you hear it. There's a little click. So there are two ways to get rid of this click. And what I've been doing for like the past 9 years is just move this a little bit like this, and the problem is resolved. But I actually found out not too long ago that we have this smooth right here. For some reason, I've never noticed it before. If you just set it to like 8, the click is gone. And here you have the control over the depth. You like the curve maybe, but you want it to be a little less aggressive. Reduce this. I bring this point down here, and if I press Option on my keyboard, this is gonna snap. That's a great feature. I also didn't know this for the longest time. And when I found out, I was like, oh my God, so much time wasted trying to really stick the points to the grid. Now I can do this and play with this curve, make it real smooth. Love it. Yeah. And you can do this with the other methods, of course, but for doing these kind of things, it's just so intuitive, so fast. I love to use LFO Tool or Shaperbox to do this. You can do exactly the same thing also with Shaperbox. Sidechain, I can select one of the curves that are provided to us. But there's a problem. Now it's set to 1 bar. We set it to 1/4. There we go. Sounding very good. So as you can see, this method is very, very convenient whenever you have a track that has something happening 4 on the floor, whether it's these synths and you want to have this pumping effect 4 on the floor, or whether you want to do it for bass and kick, that's fine, you can do that too. But it's not really convenient when you have a kick that's not moving 4 on the floor, that's not hitting every quarter note. I really suggest that you use this, especially when it's like 4 on the floor, or maybe let's say that in this case we want to have the track halftime, and I'm gonna have this effect in 1/2. So you know, it's flexible, but up to a certain point depending on what you really need to do. Number 4, you won't believe this. Some producers really like to design these curves for the sidechain manually. Don't ask me why, I wouldn't do it. But some producers, and I'm not talking like random people, I'm talking about Zed. I know for sure that Zed, I don't know now, but like a few years ago, he was doing that. He was designing the curves manually. And what I mean by that, he's not designing the curves inside LFO tool or anything like that. So what he does is this, he just takes the volume of the track, which is this one, and he starts automating for every quarter note the curve that he wants and create basically a manual sidechain. I can take a utility and I can start designing my curve like this. By pressing Option on Ableton, I can enable these kind of curves depending on what I want. Duplicate this. This is basically doing the same thing that LFO tool is doing, but manually. It works. It definitely works. But I don't know why you would need to do this. Maybe, let's say that for some reason you want this curve to be a little bit different than this one. Okay, I can do that. Maybe I can do this and then I can do something like that. Yeah, I can duplicate this now, and here I can do something different again. Of course, it's adding some variety and something new every time. So if this is what you need, give this a try. Last but not least, number 5. You can always go for a combination of all of these 4 methods that we've just seen. And sometimes it's very convenient to do that. Let's go back for a little bit to the song that I did for my masterclass. In this case, let's say that we went for the multi-band sidechain compression that we still have right here. We're not using this band, we're just attenuating the low end, okay? Maybe I went for this, and I'm pretty happy with it. But again, this is only affecting the low end, and maybe I want to have a little bit of that pumping and sidechain effect on the whole thing. What I could do is, for example, use also this classic sidechain compression and put it after. So let's see what's happening here. The multiband compression is making sure that the low end is getting attenuated. And then after this, we have the classic sidechain compression that I can keep light at this point because the low end is already taken care of by the multiband compressor. So what I can do is, for example, lower the ratio. I can make sure that the threshold is not too high, just to have a little bit more of that nice pumping effect. What I could do is play with the percentage. This is one tip that I would always encourage you to try. No matter the method that you choose, you can always play with the percentage. You can do this here. You can reduce this if that's too much. You can do this here. You can do it in LFO tool with the depth control. So in this case, I will want to do this because I have good control over the low end already. So this additional compression that I'm adding, I don't want it to be too heavy. I can put this to around 60% and just add a little bit more. And I have one more tip for you guys that you can achieve only with some compressors. So for example, the Ableton stock one is not gonna allow us to do this. So let's mute this for a second and let's open the Pro C by FabFilter, and I'm gonna set it for the sidechain again. All of the controls that we've seen before in the Ableton stock compressor, we have them here. But what I wanna show you is that in this compressor, we have some different styles. We have clean, we have classic, opto, punch, pumping. And depending on the style that you select, you will see a different curve. Clean looks like this, but look at the curve changing when I put it in pumping. Look at the shape, completely changed, and also the sound is completely different now. It's way more noticeable. So I would have to set it in a different way if I want to keep it in pumping. I can do that. And again, I can play with the percentage here. That's too noticeable, too much for me. Not bad. But if I put it back to, I don't know, punch, it changes again. Look at this. Shorter now, so I can increase the release again. So this is just to show you that there are no exact values that you can copy, okay? Maybe you see, I don't know, 134 milliseconds and now you think, oh, that's the value that I have to use. It's not exactly like that. You have to use your ears, you have to try, you have to experiment, and depending on the song, depending on the tempo of your track, these are all factors that are gonna matter. So this is how you sidechain compress in 5 different ways, and you guys gotta be pro by now. Just kidding. I know this can sound like a lot of information, but no worries, because you're on your way to make your beats sound a little bit better. You can always replay this video, go watch it, and I promise once you practice it a little bit, you will become a pro at this. If you have any questions, of course, leave them below. I will answer to all of you. So thank you so much for watching. Now hit the like button if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and I'll see you in the next one.